Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar. It's 6 o'clock, and I suppose we better make a start. So good to see many of you here. My name is Katja Stoddart, and with me is my colleague Richard Bowes, who'll be doing talk you through our excellent study trip that we had in Sweden recently, and Miriam Druid is here with us as well. Elena is at home and looking after you if you have any sound issues. So Richard is going to talk you through the experiences that we had on our recent visit, a very cold visit to snowy Sweden. We're very lucky to have one of our excellent hosts on tonight as well. Torun is on the webinar, and she is happy to help with any questions that you might have that we don't have the answers to. Now, before we begin, there's a few housekeeping messages. Firstly, if this is your first webinar, then just be sure that no one can hear you. All your microphones are muted. So don't worry if the dog barks. If you have any questions, please save them up till the end, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. You can see a chat box on your console, I guess on your screen, what you would call it. Please, if you have any questions, type in your question, and I will deal with it at the end, so I'll make sure I get them all answered. Also, if you have any sound issues or your screen is frozen or any other issues, please type it in there and we'll deal with it as we go along. We'll keep monitoring those questions as they come in. So, without further ado, sit back, relax. We'll entertain you for the next hour. We're aiming to go through until 7. If for whatever reason our phone or our sound cuts out, every now and again that does happen that our phone cuts out, then please, if that happens, stay on the line and we'll rejoin the webinar as soon as we can. So, Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Katja. Good evening, everyone. So, as you can see, we've got an overview of the Swedish pig industry and picture in front of you. And basically, the reason for the study tour was to look at two things, really. Or the main two things we were looking at was rearing with intact tail, so no tail docking, and also free farrowing, because in Sweden they're not allowed farrowing crates and they're not allowed to tail dock. So those are the two main key issues that we were arranged the trip for. Here we have a picture of our host from SLU. There we have Rebecca Weston. She was our main contact for organisation of the trip and the email trail through, but she was then helped very much with Torun Waldron, and both Rebecca and Torun delivered presentations on our first day visit. And also at the top left there we have a gentleman, Stefan Gunnarsson. He also is based at the SLU, and he delivered some presentations as well to give us some overview, and that's what I'm going to discuss in a moment, an actual overview of what we saw. But in addition, just to clarify what happened as well, we on the second night, you'll see that picture that's just come on, that actually is a pig club meeting that we had with a group of farmers, as well as Rebecca, Torun and Stefan, and some of their other colleagues from the SLU. And it was an opportunity for us to discuss what we'd seen the previous 2 days, and also talk about deliver presentations, a couple of presentations from the couple of the people on the tour from the UK. And then the farm visits, the top one here is the first farm visit we did, and that gentleman's name is Peter Eriksson, and the bottom one is, the other gentleman was a manager actually, and his name also was Peter, but it was Peter Larson. So they're the two gentlemen that showed us around their farms. So, an overview of pig farming in Sweden. As you can see, 1,200 pig farms, that's commercial pig farms, producing 2.5 million finishers, 140,000 sows, and the average size of farm in Sweden is approximately 176, or currently is 176 animals per farm, and they produce 1% of the total of EU pig meat. A little bit like the UK, they went through a difficult stage in the industry, financially speaking, but they're, at the time of the visit and since 2015, the price they've been receiving is above the cost of production, so they are in some profit, which is always very welcome. They're 70% self-sufficient, and imports are actually dipping, more than likely due to the fact that obviously there's a tight availability of pig meat across Europe, hence the increase in the price, or part of the reason for the increase in price in general terms across Europe. Slightly against the consensus of what's happening in the rest of Europe, the actual consumption is going up in Sweden, although production is dropping because of, in general, the last dip in financials. Obviously, a little bit like this country, come under pressure. Some farms went out of business, particularly the very small farms, and with it being 140 sow industry, then obviously you can soon erode a fairly high percentage of those if even a group of small farmers go out of production. And there's been a 37% reduction in pig numbers produced per year in the last 10 years. And again, it's a reflection really of a similar what happened in the UK and to a certain extent across Europe, with the actual herd size being reduced mainly through profitability. They have no integrated businesses, unlike here and in Europe. There's approximately 10 abattoirs in Sweden, with a few additional small ones. I think in general we've lost all the small ones in the UK, but they've still got some small ones available. They have what they call small labels, so the farmers are able to sell their product, their meat, under a label, but it's not necessarily a welfare plus. It's just specific to their particular business. They get vet visits every 6 to 8 weeks and part of their health scheme, very similar to what we have. Obviously ours is 3 monthly. One of the big issues I feel was that they're actually PRRS negative in Sweden. Issue in respect of very positive, and I'm sure that does help in lots of aspects of their pig keeping. As we all know, PRRS can be a big niggle to a farm and actually affect production greatly as well as health. They're very low on antibiotic use, only 10% use blanket treatment, 90% of times individual. So what we mean by blanket treatment is obviously either in water or in feed, but generally speaking it's in water medication that they use. The actual genetics are all downbred and top pigs, all coming from Denmark. They have no individual genetic company operating in Sweden, I guess because of the size of their actual industry. The businesses have gone out. Most pigs are liquid fed, as you'll see from the pictures later, and underfloor heating is extremely common, particularly in the farrowing accommodation. Again, I'll explain a little bit more detail later as we go through. This is just a picture of Sweden, just to sort of identify the sort of main area really. The Skara that's pointed out in the picture there is where we were at the university, and the blue points are the sort of general areas of pigs. As you can see, as you go further north, the dots get more space as you'd expect, and there's a smaller amount of pigs up there. There is the odd pig unit one right at the north, but in general it's more southern based in Sweden. Again, that's obviously due to the fact that that's where they can access grain as well. It's not dissimilar to the east side of this country. Here we have 4 different pictures. Nice bit of snow about, so prove it was snowing when we were there. Apparently we took it with us, but they've not had a lot since late November, early December. But as you can see by the buildings, they're very modern looking. Actually, 2 of the buildings here on the left are actually were built in 2009, but the as you can see by the quality, they look relatively new to look at, and are not dissimilar to what you'd probably see in Denmark or Holland, or on new builds in the UK. The picture in the bottom right here is effectively where they're loaded, and I've just highlighted the fact that they've got a drop-down door there, so that when they bring the pigs out, they can make it so that pigs can't get back in. So it just keeps the biosecurity at a higher level. So going on to regulations with the in the gestation area, they're currently only allowed 25 to 30% slatted. The rest has to be solid floor. Previously, they were allowed up to 50%, but as we sit here now, it's 25 to 30. Service pens are as per UK regulations, so that means that they're not allowed to use service stalls other than actually at service time, as we do in the UK. They can't stay in there for 26, 28 days like they do in some countries currently. They have to have daily access to straw or other manipulable materials, and those materials can be peas and beans, they can be, I lost my notes, but the main use is really straw, and that's what they're aiming to put in each pen, because they find that works the best for them. And they're mainly deep straw-bedded pens as well. As I said earlier, mainly liquid fed. Farrowing rate currently, as we were there, was around the 85 to 90%, so not dissimilar to what we've got here in the UK at 84%. So very, very, very similar. Here we've got three pictures of the actual service area, and what we can see on the top left is actually the service area stroke dry sows, and as I said earlier, we've got the actual service pens there if they want to use them, or what we call free access stalls for feeding as well. And as you can see by the picture, it's plenty of deep straw there, and obviously they can clean this out as and when they need to when the sows are eating. And this was actually, I believe, a gilt area at the bottom that we got here, and it just shows that the straw that they're about to use as they fill up the pens. And this was, as you can see by this picture, plenty in the buildings, plenty of natural light coming through from the side, and also with the ridge there as well. This was obviously letting air out as well. It was the side inlets of this building, and air was taken out the ridge. And just an overview there of the lighting that they have. So again, really well lit, and very modern looking buildings inside as well. So on farrowing, free farrowing is all they're allowed. They cannot use farrowing crates as an ongoing. They have to be free farrowing. 6 meters squared is the footprint that they mostly have now for their freedom farrowing. I think in the past we were told that they had tried different sizes, but 6 meters squared was the one that seemed to work the best. As I said earlier about the solid floor, 75% must be solid, 25% can be slats. They can crate sows in exceptional cases. One would assume them exceptional cases are likely if a sow is extremely savage with a litter, so they can just work with the sow and the piglets at farrowing time. But some of the, as you see some of the pictures we go through, they actually, in the farms that we visited, they didn't actually have any way of creating them in the pens, so it would have been difficult for them, I guess. But the second farm that we visited was effectively, when you looked at it, a 360 style setup, as you'll see when the pictures come later. So I guess they could create if they wanted to. They said they never do, and the expectation was that they managed the system as they've got it. So if they were caught creating them, then obviously they'll be in serious trouble, because it's legally not allowed. Extra materials are always given for nest building, mostly straw, and again, they have to have access to straw, depending on how much they give. And you'll see by the pictures we come later, so different farms give slightly different amounts, as you find in this country. Pigs are castrated, but they're not allowed to tail dock. Teeth clipping is allowed, again, a little bit similar to what we spoke to earlier, when you've got an issue possibly with them doing some damage to the sow or gilt, but again, it's not practiced regularly. It's something that would be done on an ad hoc once now and again. Regulators used and allowed to be used, and but they're not allowed to use hormones to induce farrowing. So they can use hormones to regulate the pigs coming on heat, but at farrowing time they're not allowed to use hormones such as Plan 8. So what we have here now is an actual view of one of the farrowing systems we've got here. This one, as you can see, is showing the first pen here, the sows are looking over at us. But the reason we show this picture is to sort of try and explain how they sort of integrate the pens so that the sows can act very naturally. And as you can see, they've got some straw in the pen there. And you'll see as we go along, there's actually different amounts of straw in different pens. On this particular farm, they were chopping the straw, and on the second farm we visited, they weren't. So, like mostly in the UK, people have different ideas of what works for them, but to be fair, both farms were making it work very well in respect of production. But it's just the sows can interact with each other and have a bit of a chit-chat if they wish. Again, showing the farrowing in a little bit more detail with some piglets there. And here you can see this pen on the right hasn't actually got that much straw in there. It's only a very, very little amount actually covering the pen here. There's one on the left has still got quite an amount of straw there. It's always going to be an issue of how much straw gets down the slats. On the second farm, they were using underfloor, under slat scrapers, and they said that they actually operated the scrapers every day for the first 5 days post-farrowing, and then after that it was pretty much every 3 to 5 days, depending on how much straw was going down the slats. But we all know straw and slats don't always mix. The reason I've shown this picture, apart from being a grand litter of piglets, was that the lamp that you can see is not an infrared per se. It wasn't really there to give heat, it's more of an attraction. And I put my hand underneath just to actually check that, and there's no real heat coming from that. All the floors have underfloor water pipes, which we felt was a really positive effect and actually encouraged pigs by the light, but obviously the nice warm environment for them to get under the creep and away from the sow and reduce overlays. And the actual environment in the farrowing houses was excellent. We were quite impressed with the freshness of the air. But again, I'll go into a little bit more detail about the ventilation system as we go through the pictures. Yeah, this one actually is showing a 50-50, where you've got 50% slatted, and here, and obviously 50% of the rest of the pen is solid. Now this was built before regulations changed. I believe in the order of 2009 to 2012, somewhere there, that the regulations changed, and as they are currently 75-25. But the farmer that's got these obviously didn't have to alter the pens. He was allowed to keep them because they've been put in latest regulations, which saved him a lot of expense. The other thing I just missed on the previous picture I'll show you, so highlighted, was the actual, all those pigs I said earlier are wet fed, or at least the 2 farms we visited and 90% of the industry. And so you can see the wet feeders down there at the side. And as the piglets get older, then obviously they're able to access some of that as well, which is probably going to help a little bit with their gut and get them ready for weaning, as well as they do feed creep as well under the creep area, but they can access that feed as well. The reason I put this picture in was really to highlight how well they'd set up the ventilation system. As you can see by the pen here, look, very clean. Again, quite a bit of straw in this pen. The feeding area is there, but the sow is actually, while I was there and I took this picture, is actually using the proper area to do as a toilet area. So, and most of the pens were like this. There was very few pens that had got any sort of dung or anything in the pens. They were really clean. So they've obviously done a good job in respect of organising the ventilation system, and it was working well. Yeah, this one we took because it shows you, this is on the second farm actually, they were actually giving their pigs quite a large amount of straw prior to farrowing to the sow to make a really good nest. This is sort of something that you tend to see here in the UK actually. For those that have freedom farrowing, they tend to put quite a large amount of straw in for the sows to make a natural nest. Excuse me. And then, as you can probably see as well, this actual straw wasn't chopped. This is just as it's put in. Obviously the sow's done a little bit of chewing and she's made a nest there ready. She was about to start farrowing, and she was sort of getting herself ready. And so in this situation, they wouldn't add any more straw for quite some time, and just add on as they go along then, as time goes by, just to keep some straw in the pen. But they were providing quite a large amount of straw at farrowing. And it's just interesting that the first farm, you know, they were keen to chop the straw, and this guy said no, there's no need. Their mortality was fine as far as he was concerned, which again we'll go into mortality and sort of production figures a little bit later. I'm afraid this is in Swedish, but it's just really just to show that they have very similar sort of sow cards that you'd find anywhere really, just detailing production levels of sows, and obviously any treatments they've got there. I can see diagnosis, so I guess that's, you know, treatments of what they've had in this particular pen, but nothing really dissimilar to what we use. You see anywhere in Europe as well as in the UK. Just a typical recording system, and but everything was well recorded. So moving on to farrowing performance. We were told by Rebecca and Torren that the average for Sweden as regards pre-weaning mortality was 17.7%. But I have to say that the two farms we visited, particularly the second farm, they were doing somewhere near a 12% mortality. And that was with around a 15 born alive. So obviously using dam bred and top pigs, they're obviously accessing high genetic production, and as we've put in there, 15 live born, but it is increasing as well. At the time of the visit on the farms we visited, there wasn't much use of nurse sows or split suckling, but we were told that it was something that they were going to look at more closely, particularly split suckling. Bearing in mind the born alive, I think it's really important that they get the actual management correct for the colostrum. And it's something I know Rebecca was very keen to get the farmers doing more of, and they were looking at doing that more. I think they could see the value that was going to bring going forward. Because they're weaning between 28 days is the minimum, but again, the second farm we visited, they were weaning at 34 days, so their weaning weights, generally speaking, are in the region of an average of 10 kilos. As you'll see with the pictures coming up, they actually keep all their pigs in effectively the family group, and so they're weaned as a family group, which generally speaking will be 11, 12, 13, depending on obviously what is actually in that pen. The only time that they actually have to end up mixing pigs would be if they had a couple of smaller litters, where obviously there's no point putting 6 or 8 in a pen. They would then mix some pigs, but on the time of the visit, we only actually saw a couple of pens that had been mixed. The rest were all staying as they were. And they will stay on farm up to about 11 weeks, in the region of 25 to 30 kilos before they're moved, either sold elsewhere, or if they're fattened within the company, then they'll be moved elsewhere. And it was a split site, so it was a breeding site up to 25, 30 kilos, and then they were moving off site to be finished. So this is actually the first farm that we visited that actually kept his pigs. He weaned his sows. He was weaning at 28 days, and he actually left his piglets then in situ in the farrowing house, and then they grew on to the 25 to 30 kilos, and at that point they were moved away as a litter, and then they move into weaner and then finishing accommodation. Sorry, grower and finished accommodation, as per they are in that picture. But yeah, really healthy pigs and look really well. So moving on to the finishers, as we've already said, kept small groups. The post-weaning mortality is running around the 1.5%. Virtually all the farms are using straw, and they'll also use additional materials. And I think I said earlier, peat, beans, sweet corn is the sort of things that they'll use, as well as straw itself and extra straw as and when added and necessary. And they worked out the sort of amount of straw they're giving to the pigs, and it's averages about 50 grams a day per pig. And this was work that was done at SLU. I believe Torren told us these figures, and the range is 8 to 85. Obviously, depends on the size and age of the pig. 8 being the small piglets, age-wise and size. They do, unfortunately, get some vice, even though they're in small groups. And they reported to us that at the abattoir, they see up to 2.5% of what they call severe tail bites. This generally occurs in the finishers, and they were saying that all the work they're doing is based around giving the pigs extra enrichment. And again, as I said earlier, keep repeating myself, I know, but it was really focused on straw. They felt that was the best enrichment to have available for the pigs, and that was what they were actually giving the pigs. Any pigs that are tail bitten, we were told that they will be treated pretty much as we would here, I guess, penicillin and the use of something like Metacam as pain relief. The other thing we was also told, though, on that score was that the animals that are actually causing the tail biting, so that the tail biter, if they can spot that, which is easier in a smaller group, they would actually remove that pig and try and do that as early as possible to stop the issue getting worse. As regards space requirements, the graph, as you can see, shows effectively the difference between what Sweden allow and what the EU regulations are, which I believe are comparable to red tractor at the moment in the UK. But we can always, if anybody has any question on that, we can try and answer that a bit later. But it just gives you a really, a ballpark figure there. Would probably be saying that they're giving their pigs 10% more than what is in the EU. So this is a graph or picture, sorry, of the sort of two types of pens that they actually use for their finishers. And effectively what I've got here is what we call the long trough, which is, they're the troughs. This is the slatted area, this is the solid areas. And then on this one, you've got the pens at the slats at the back of the pen, and that's sharing the trough down the middle, and then you've got your solid areas either side, which I'm going on to show you some pictures of that, which you'll see a little bit better. So here we've got the shared trough layout. As you can see, they're actually feeding down here, and then they've got the slats at the back there, and they've got the slats at the back. So if we go back, we're actually looking at this one. And that relates to that. And again, the idea of having the pens back to back also makes it so that they can integrate with each other, albeit in their separate pens. And then this is the other caption of pigs, where it's meeting up with this system of the long trough, and so the animals they're actually almost like in a zigzag effect, and it's quite a clever way of using the space. And I'll just highlight here that all the inlets are coming in here, so the air is actually going to drop down onto the slatted area, and encourage the pigs to keep this area where they're sleeping here all nice and clean. And obviously you've got the sleeping area both sides with the slatted area in the middle there. Then we go on to, again, just wanted to highlight really, again, the ventilation system. So we've got the actual inlets all the way down the middle here. Again, lots of of natural light coming through as well as artificial, that the buildings are really well lit, and then we've got the extraction fans on the side here. But again, the atmosphere was really excellent in these buildings, and the pigs look really well actually. But I think with any systems we know, you have to get the ventilation system right and get the air dropping in a correct manner. And also, as I said earlier, the underfloor heating is very much part of the system that makes the atmosphere good, and actually creates that two atmospheres of warm and cold, so the pigs can actually adopt the natural ways. In addition to that, they did have in some of these valves, I think it was every other, some water going through here, so that when the temperature drops in Sweden, gets very cold at times, very, very cold, so they can actually have added heat coming through the water pipes through these bars as well as what they have under the floor. Again, the pig's just a bit older here, really, not that far off bacon size, but it just shows you, nice pictures of some really quality pigs, very much peas in a pod, really. Not a lot to say about that picture, apart from the pigs look really, really well. And again, though, you can just see in this pen there is still straw available to these animals, so they do have straw right the way through. Obviously, it's going to get a smaller amount as they get a bit older, but it is available there. As you can see, all with the tails all in situ, no docking whatsoever. So, just to try and bring a bit of a conclusion for all what we've gone through, really. All the pigs are kept in small groups, and generally family groups. As I said earlier, there's the odd pen that has to be mixed, but that would be only as and when it is necessary. Basically, most of the pigs are as a family group right the way from birth to, or once they've been fostered anyway at birth, right the way through to finishing. Bulls are castrated, which we felt may potentially keep them calmer, and certainly reduce the amount of riding, which you can see obviously with entires. And they weren't sexing; they were keeping the pigs all mixed. So it wasn't a case that there was keeping them sexed. Ventilation very well controlled, and we didn't really come across any cold spots in the house. As you can imagine, we had a real good look around every room. Everything was very open, and as we said earlier, the actual environment was excellent. Air quality was very good. I think I mentioned that earlier as well. The actual environment was fantastic, really. We felt possibly one of the contributing factors that helps the animals is the fact that gut health was improved by the fact that they were predominantly wet feeding in Sweden, which obviously raises the gut pH and reduces any gut discomfort. And pigs can all feed together. So because they're on a long trough system in either designs, we're really ending up with pigs being able to feed at all stages together. So effectively you're mimicking what happens in the farrowing house right the way through. So I appreciate in a small group that's obviously what you can do, and it's a lot more difficult in a larger group, even if it was two lists together. So that led to no queuing and no frustrations or pigs getting aggravated through being hungry and wanting to eat when they can't. As we saw, lower stocking density leading to larger space allowances. Use of straw, not always massive amounts, but straw is available at all times, all the way through the pig's life. All classes of pigs had access to straw, and in some cases other manipulable materials as well. Genetics, the second farm visit said that they were actually selecting their own stock, and they were selecting for calm mothers, which they were hoping would pass on through the offspring, so that it just all kept everything really calm and sort of reduce aggression and that sort of ilk in the animals to a minimum. Would they go back to crates? This was at the meeting. We asked them at the pig club style meeting, and they all said no. They're happy with what they have at the moment, but that's obviously no holy grail for us. And the last picture is again just highlighting the fact that this sow was doing what she should do, and I think that just proves how well the system was working. It's so annoying, as we know, for animals to not do what they should do where we want them to, and this system, I think, was working really well because of that. And if you start getting dirty pens, particularly in a farrowing house, then it's going to lead to a big increase in issues, particularly affecting mortality as well as growth and disease, etc.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. Excellent. Well, that gives us some time for questions. So, fingers at the buttons, and please send us in your questions. Whilst they're coming in, Richard, there are two that came in as you were talking.
Okay.
One was a question about the weaning age. Can you please remind us of what age they generally get weaned?
Yeah, the minimum weaning age is 28 days. That is by law. They're not allowed to wean below 28 days. But certainly quite a number of farms are weaning up to 5 weeks of age. And I think, providing which in their case they were doing, they were able to feed the sows more food and a better quality food to make sure they don't lose too much condition. I think that was also helping, obviously, with weaning weight, so you've got a more stronger quality weaned pig that then can go on from that point. And just as a little addition, I do remember Rebecca and Torrance saying that they weren't using zinc as a regular inclusion in diets. It was on some farms a little bit, but in general terms they were avoiding the use of zinc, which, as we know, is something that's on our horizon going forward for the industry in the UK. So possibly, I'm not saying that it's for definite, but possibly that was helping a little bit, the fact that they were weaning up to 34 days, 35 days.
Absolutely. Weekly service?
What was the question? Sorry.
Their weekly service. So can you tell us a bit more about the service regime?
Oh, right, okay, sorry, yes. They, obviously, some farms, well, the weekly routines would no doubt be the same as what we're doing here, in respect of they're serving the sows weaning on a Wednesday, stroke Thursday, and then actually serving on a Monday and Tuesday. There was, I believe, on the second farm we visited, he actually was doing something slightly different. He was weaning slightly later in the week to try and get his farrowings to not be on a weekend. But that means that you'd normally have to end up serving on a weekend. But there's some farms in this country would do that. They had a pretty good setup in the service areas in respect of good boar contact. They were also using service buddies, as well as the automated service buddies as well on the second farm to improve the actual service and stimulation at service. They were AIing, and none of them were collecting their own AI. It was all delivered AI from studs, and there wasn't no boar services. In other words, it was all AI. And like the rest of the buildings, all really well lit, well laid out, good pig flow. So there was an emphasis on creating a really good environment for service to try and get the maximum. As we saw, 15 born alive. You don't get 15 born alive if you're not doing the service correctly. And the conception rate was on a par with the UK.
So that brings me on to the question, and we may not know the answer to this, but what age do they cull sows?
They said to us that they were, in general, aiming to cull out no earlier than about 6th parity. That would be a target for them, 6/7. But they did say that they had, on both farms, they did have sows that were above that were really high prolific animals. They had kept them, so they did have animals on the farm that were parity 8s and 9s. But they were the sort of high performers. Yeah. But in general terms, their parity profile was quite good. It wasn't a case of keeping too many older sows. Hence, the results will start to deplete, as we know. So it was just, again, a lot of farmers do keep a few token high-performing sows a little bit longer than, but they're not dissimilar to us, aiming for 6/7 parity.
Okay. So a question here has come in about hormones. In your presentation, you said no hormones are given to bring on farrowing.
Yeah, Plan 8, yes.
Yeah, is oxytocin?
No, they're not allowed to use that as well, as far as I'm aware. If Sweden will be listening to me here, Karen will be listening, and if I'm wrong with that, she can tell us. But I believe they're not allowed to use them either, which I think is pretty similar to Denmark. I don't think they can use them either, but they are allowed to use Regimate.
Okay. So going back to, I'm just reading questions as I'm going through them. Question here, and that's, are there any issues with sows drying up whilst the piglets are feeding off creep?
We didn't see an issue with that, to be fair, and I can't remember anybody really asking that. As you can see with my last picture that's still on screen, I hope, for everybody to see, the sow udders were, in general, very good. Piglet quality was good, and they seemed to be milking well. I know everybody has their own opinion, but wet feeding does seem to promote good milk productivity. Certainly in my experience in the UK. That doesn't mean to say that dry feeding is wrong with that. I'm not trying to be controversial in any way. It's just that as far as I could see, they were getting some no problems with pigs drying off that we saw. Okay, so
I was just getting a message in from Torren from Sweden, and she says they can use oxytocin, but only when the sow needs it for medical purposes. So that's very handy. Thank you.
That's been clarified. That's good.
And that also means that each sow therefore needs to be treated individually. Brilliant. Thank you, Torren. That's brilliant. Okay, so the 10 kilogram weaning weight you referred to, that was a weaning age at 5 kilo. 10 kilogram weaning weight was at 5 weeks. That was at 34/35 days. Yes. Okay.
So it's not quite 5, but it's done.
In terms of the wet feed, are there? Is it just meal and water, or is there any use of co-products?
No, they were getting co-products. Which I think are similar to what we have here, whey, potato starch, etc. But they, the farms were all making use of either their own grain or obviously buying it locally. And so as much as possible is certainly produced in the region, the wheat and the barley.
So are there many commercial outdoor units in Sweden, is one of the questions that come in.
I think the answer is no, but I think Torren will tell us if we're wrong on that one. But I think, I guess if they'd got any chance of having an outdoor, it would be down the south of Sweden. It would have to be because of the extreme weather conditions elsewhere, particularly the further north you go. We certainly weren't told anything about outdoor production.
Okay. Right then, going back to the Farrowing Hse. How long is it empty before the new sows come into farrowing?
I believe it's just pretty much the same turnover as what we would have. They'll give themselves 5 days to a week to clean out, pressure wash, and then for it to dry out and rest for it would go in. It depends on the amount of accommodation they've got, but farrowing is the most expensive on any farm, so consequently you can't imagine they would want to go more than 5 days, turn around from the pigs leaving to entering.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, the question about how the straw was delivered. They obviously use a fair amount of straw, and it depends. How was it delivered? Was it manually or automatic?
Farrowing Hse, I believe, was manual, but obviously, as we saw that bigger picture with the big bales, they were using a small tractor or a bobcat style to move them about, but they weren't blowing straw in through a chopper, I don't believe.
Right. Okay. Gosh, you're doing really well. You're coming in thick and fast. That's
good,
brilliant.
Good.
So it's clearly that there's very different climate in Sweden than it is here. So the question that's coming is, are the farrowing houses insulated in the walls and the roof?
Yes, they are. I believe I've got some figures somewhere which I'll be able to give you in a moment. I think it was something like 250 mil was the minimum actual insulation that they were actually putting in the pens. And I did ask the first farmer, because he'd actually had his building built to specification, as you saw in the pictures, of a typical Danish setup in respect to the ventilation and that, and the lighting and area. And I asked him how much he'd got in his roof, and he more or less said it was sort of 18 inches thick of wood wool. So and that was just in the ceiling, not in the walls, quite as thick as that. So a minimum of 250 mil is what they said.
Great stuff. Does the Swedish pig industry benchmark that performance?
Yeah, I think we was asked that question when we were over there, weren't we? Yeah, I'm not. I know they have an Agrosoft style system set up, so I would imagine if people are on the same system, they'll be able to benchmark then within the recorded system that they're on. That would be my answer to that.
Sounding great. Okay. Right. So, do we know anything about growth rate advantage, say as a percentage? The question is, does keeping weaners in family group versus mixing into bigger groups, is there any difference in the growth rate?
We saw some figures where they were actually, when they put the graph up, that they were actually growing as a reasonable rate in comparison to the UK. And I think it was, off the top of my head, it was something like 660 grams a day that they were growing from weaning to slaughter. Again, because of the genetics they've got, obviously they're relatively modern genetics, so we know the downbred and toppies do grow quite well. And I think the fact that they're not mixing the pigs, as we all know, you normally get some sort of stalling at when you mix pigs, so they're being able to eliminate that issue. It's going to have a beneficial effect.
Brilliant. I was just looking through the notes that we made at the time. There's a question's come in here, which is a very good question, and I've just posted to our Swedish counterparts. As you can see on many of the photos, the pens are actually yellow. It's a very sunny environment.
Yes.
The question is, why are the pens yellow? Does the colour of the pens have an effect on the mood of the pigs?
Good question. I would imagine that the coloration would be probably the fact that they're buying it from one particular company that produces that material in that colour. So yes, it'll make it brighter. It's a bit like having a white sort of wall or pen divisions. It will make the pens lighter and all enhance what's going on. But whether that's affecting them, I don't think pigs can see yellow, can they?
I don't know.
I think they only see blue.
Yeah, it's a sort of a composite material, and it says, you know, I guess it depends on the material, and apparently sometimes they are also green. So it's probably to do with the material and the colours that are to hand, rather it being a specific choice. It does make it very friendly environment. Good question.
Yeah, very good question.
That's a nice question.
It's interesting that sometimes you don't really see these things when you're there. So it's great that someone comes in with a question like that, because it's obvious when someone highlights it, but not really to us at the time.
Well, we're most certainly tailing off towards the end of the questions. Having said that, of course, there's other ones just keep popping in. Brilliant. So do the Farrowing houses maintain similar lighting levels and lighting times as they do in the UK? I suspect they will.
Yes, I think they were working on 16 hours.
In terms of lighting levels, that will be a European requirement. So that will be the same. So we'll say yes unless we hear otherwise. Question about the cost of production. What is the cost of production in Sweden? I believe you referred to that in the presentation.
Yeah, the first farm that we visited, which was Peter Eriksson, he was saying that at the time of the visit, in Swedish crown, the cost of production was 14 crown per kilo, and he was currently receiving 17.7, and the 0.7 was because he was on his own label, so he got a slight premium because he was selling his pigs under his own label. So if you work on the basis that they were getting 3 Swedish crowns profit at that rate, so 14 wouldn't necessarily be an industry average, but it was for the farmer that told us. So again, possibly Torren can give us a figure for Sweden as a whole, but I would guess it's not far off 14 has been a current industry as well.
Yeah. So we've already heard that quite a lot of the treatment is pig specific, so individual specific, and the question that's come in is what are the attitudes towards euthanasia versus treatment? Do they tend to euthanize casualties rather than treat them?
No, I don't think. I think obviously at the end of the day, welfare is down to the welfare of the pig, and if the pig has to be euthanized, then that is the proper and correct thing to do. But they wouldn't euthanize as a routine because an animal is ill, or if it can be treated and it's not in pain, then they'll treat it. But then obviously if its welfare is at risk because of whatever the injury or illness is, then they would euthanize just as you would anywhere else. I think that's really a standard thing across all pig enterprises, really, wherever you are. Welfare is obviously doesn't just mean keeping them alive. It means, and treating them. It also means sometimes, unfortunately, euthanizing, but when it's appropriate.
Okay, so they still castrate in Sweden.
They do.
The question is, will they be able to continue castrating, and what would they do if they couldn't?
Well, I think the rest of Europe that currently castrates has got the same issue, haven't they? That the European legislation is coming in where they're potentially going to ban.
It's a voluntary ban, yeah, which is coming in across the UK. It's a voluntary ban. I believe that they're behind with it. What they do in Sweden is they do use, I believe, both anaesthetic and analgesic.
Yes, they do. Yes, they don't just straight castrate. They are using pain relief to actually carry it out. So
I guess that can continue unless it's done otherwise. As to what they will do if that they'd have to stop, that would be a challenge that I'm sure the industry would have to take on.
Yeah, and the decision would have to be made by their own industry, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So we go from castration to labour. Castration takes labour, it's a nice little bridge. How many labour units are required per sow? You did get some information about how many people were working there.
Yes, we did. Obviously, I think like most farms, it's going to... so the first farm was 330 sows taken through to finishing, and he has a total of 5 staff employed. But actually, on the pigs themselves, he just had 2 ladies working with the pigs. The other staff were helping as and when with the pigs, but also doing other things on arable, and they also had some forestry. So interestingly, he did sort of say what staff are paid there, and obviously Sweden is quite an expensive country compared to the UK. and he was saying that staff are paid between 120 and 150 Swedish crown per hour, which is roughly between 11 and 13 pounds an hour in sterling.
Brilliant. Okay. So the next question is about water. So we've already said that they were given mostly liquid feed, which actually Torin did clarify throughout the discussion to say that some people do just mix meal and water and other people add additional components to that. But so aside from the liquid feed, is clean drinking water provided via a drinker, a nipple drinker, or a bowl?
It's via generally a nipple drinker. I've got, if everybody can see this Farrowing Hse picture with the sow, you can see that there's a drinker line coming down here. There's the drinker there. Hopefully you'll see that.
Okay.
Just in that picture there.
Brilliant.
So yes, the answer is yes, they do have access to water.
And do the piglets have a separate water supply?
Yes, they did.
In the creep area?
Yes. Don't know as I've got a picture of that, unfortunately, but they did, yes.
MRSA. Did we have a discussion about MRSA in the during our visit? We did.
We did.
It's not something that I understand. It's being routinely tested in Sweden. We know there is, of course, a lot of Danish meat coming in, so the discussion is ongoing. It was discussed. Another question that's come in on a similar topic, I guess, it's to do with antibiotic use. What, in our view, contributed to lower antibiotic use? Was it a higher weaning age, cleaning farrowing pens?
I guess my view, it's my personal view, this one would be, as I said during the presentation, I think the fact that they're PERS negative is a big contribution, because we, as I say, we know what problems that causes. It just opens the door to all sorts of things, so I'm sure that helps immensely. Yes, I'm sure the fact that they're keeping their pigs as a litter group is bound to help. They're not mixing, so that's going to help. In general terms, they haven't got as many pigs in an airspace as what we would have here, because of the fact that they're keeping them as a group. And a rough guide for pricing of the fact that they've got the pigs in relatively small amounts in litter sizes was that in England you'd probably look, in general terms, it's a ballpark figure this, but somewhere between 250 and 350 pounds per pig's place for finishes. The finishing system we saw was in the region, cost the farmer in the region of £500, and it was converted into sterling. So obviously you lose a lot of space by having all these petitions and having the amount of pigs and adding that extra space that they obviously have as part of their legislation, so they have to do it. So, but all these things come at a cost, and as does freedom farrowing, because obviously you've got a 6 metre square pen, and that is bigger than what a traditional farrowing crate would. So everything is allowing for more space, less pigs. So I guess the fact that you've got that also, it probably helps in respect of being helping the environment a little bit less challenged by the number of pigs that are in the pens. But they're all anecdotal. I think the biggest thing for me was the PERS. That for me was the most significant part.
Okay. Right, I am going to draw the session to a close. There are two more questions which we'll take in, and then I think we're up to 7 o'clock, so we should bring it to an end. So 2 more questions, Richard. One is, do they mix sources in finishing? No,
they're all their own pigs. They're all going to one site. I don't think they do that as you find that it occasionally happens in this country. Although obviously I think there's been more in this country going to just one source, again because of PERS, but no, they don't. As far as I'm aware, they don't.
And the final one is, obviously we've had a really interesting time. It's been a very interesting visit, and we've learned, we've seen a lot. So how can people get involved with future study tours?
Well, I guess the best way would be to speak to your local KE manager for your region. Have a word with them, either via email or if you see them at a pig meeting, or indeed pick up the phone and have a chat and discuss. Because we're always looking for ideas. At the end of the day, we're looking to use levy payers' money to actually provide a benefit to their business, and part of that is to go on a study tour that is of use to the guys that go on the visit, and also for the industry, and hence while we're doing the webinar to discuss it, to show you what we've seen and elements that you may or may not be able to use for if you decide to go down the route of freedom farrowing, or indeed if you're looking to not stop tail docking or reduce it in some way. So as far as study tours go, AHDB Pork has a budget, but we have, as part of our business plan, certain aspects that we're always looking at. But if you're interested in getting some more details of what's coming up, and at the moment we're still in the planning stage for this financial year now, we haven't decided on anything yet, then please have a word with your local KE manager, and we'll certainly be able to give you more details as and when they come along, and also hopefully include you on the trip if it's appropriate.
Brilliant. Well, that brings us to a good end here. Thank you all very much for listening. What we're going to do is we've recorded this webinar, so we'll put the recording up on the website. So if anyone wasn't able to make it, they can find their way via our homepage to the recording. Thank you very much, Richard, for an excellent presentation. That was very informative, very well delivered. And also an enormous thank you to our Swedish host, who not only generously welcomed us, but Torin, who is also helping us answer many of the questions online. So thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all a very good evening. Goodbye.